Keanu Reeves stepped onto Sunset Boulevard beneath a sky awash with a dazzling swirl of neon lights, and the moment he emerged from the shadows, fate was already changing course. Perhaps it was the way he stood with quiet composure, or maybe it was the mystique that surrounded him like an aura most mortals couldn't hope to possess. Whatever the reason, from the instant Keanu Reeves took that first step toward the Sterling Club, the evening's destiny was set in motion. And the consequences would be felt by everyone within those pristine walls. The Sterling Club had stood for decades as the epitome of exclusivity, a fortress of wealth and status perched in Los Angeles like a smug monument. Its members arrived in sleek sports cars humming like predatory cats, each occupant adorned in designer outfits so immaculately tailored that they appeared sculpted from marble rather than sewn from fabric. Inside its polished doors, a hush of lavish indulgence reigned. Soft jazz flitted through the air. Jewel-toned cocktails glowed against crystal glassware. Hushed conversations carried an undercurrent of power and privilege. Among those who called this place their second home, a certain complacency had grown. Attendants assumed they could classify visitors on site, deciding who deserved entry based on a subtle interplay of signals. The drape of a jacket, the price of a watch, the angles of one's posture that signified old money or new celebrity. Rarely did anyone challenge that unspoken code. On this particular night, however, the unthinkable happened. The man approaching their velvet rope, Keanu Reeves, did not conform to the usual script, or so the staff believed. Dressed in a black hoodie, worn jeans, and comfortable shoes that had clearly seen better days, Keanu refused to bow to the pageantry that typically smoothed every entrance into the Sterling Club. His manner was calm, unassuming. He did not strut or wave an invitation in the doorman's face. He simply approached with the measured steps of someone who trusted that all would be in order. But at the Sterling Club, that confidence was about to be tested. From the very first moment, the staff on duty dismissed him as an interloper who had no business mingling with the opulent crowd. A practiced sweep of the doorman's gaze left no doubt that he intended to turn Keanu away. Then came the dreaded words, few in number, but always laced with condescension. He was told there was no reservation for him, that the rules demanded better attire, that a private members-only policy precluded him from stepping inside. This isn't just a story, it's a revelation. And if you want to see how far it goes, subscribe now before it disappears. In that humiliating pause, a faint murmur swelled among the line of onlookers. They recognized him, or at least suspected who he might be, but no one intervened. They waited, sipping champagne and exchanging amused glances. In their eyes, it was a minor spectacle, a small drama to liven up the night. Someone in a tailored suit whispered a teasing remark, better luck elsewhere. Another rolled her eyes as though the staff were performing a vital protective service. It was a game they had seen many times before. A doorman stands as gatekeeper, thwarting those who don't appear to meet the standard. Despite the embarrassment, Keanu did not protest. He maintained that quiet dignity for which he was known. There were no heated words or attempts to throw around his name. Instead, he calmly explained that he had, in fact, made a reservation. He took out his phone to show electronic proof that the Sterling Club had, hours ago, guaranteed him a table. Yet the doorman only dug in deeper, insisting that the visible scuff marks on Keanu's shoes, or his simple hoodie, or whatever next excuse came to mind, made him unsuited to mingle among the polished crowd inside. At that point, a few bystanders found the nerve to laugh openly. The staff member seemed determined to uphold the club's supposed exclusivity. A man sporting an expensive watch and an expression of exaggerated pity remarked that there was a fast food joint down the street. Perhaps that was a more appropriate destination for somebody who valued comfort over couture. Another claimed the club was too full, that no seats remained for walk-ins, and that it was impossible for latecomers to talk their way in. Keanu, still calm, decided to step aside without a verbal fight. A hush fell as he moved down the sidewalk, passing rows of dazzling cars. A short distance away, he found a street vendor, an upscale one that specialized in handcrafted leather shoes. Under the bright lights, the polished footwear gleamed like black mirrors. Without bargaining, Keanu purchased a pair on the spot. The vendor, recognizing him but saying nothing, completed the transaction swiftly. Shoes changed, hoodie still in place. Keanu returned to the Sterling Club's rope line, quietly demonstrating that he was more than willing to comply with their ever-shifting standards. The doorman's expression revealed that he recognized his earlier mistake. Yet pride, and the hovering presence of other wealthy patrons, kept him from openly admitting it. He let Keanu in at last, ignoring stifled snickers from a few watchers who had hoped to see the confrontation dragged out. With the door parted, Keanu stepped into the Sterling Club's inner sanctum. If he had expected calm acceptance inside, he soon discovered how deeply the club's layers of judgment could run. The interior was a study in sumptuous indulgence. Polished floors reflected muted chandeliers. The bar area housed an almost infinite array of top-shelf bottles, and each table boasted custom centerpieces that flickered in candle-lit splendor. Yet from the moment he crossed that threshold, wary gazes followed him, as though he were an intruder who had upset the natural order of things. Still determined to carry himself without resentment, Keanu took a seat at the bar. He barely had time to settle in before an attendant approached. Her tone was polite on the surface, but the brevity of her words made it plain she questioned his right to be there. She told him, without truly looking him in the eye, that there was a private event taking place and that he couldn't simply claim a seat. People nearby continued to watch with side-eyed interest. The staff member's stance and words made it clear that, although he was physically inside, the club was not prepared to treat him as a welcomed guest. There came another round of insinuations that his name was not on the list, that perhaps the system had made an error, or that the reservation he displayed was insufficient proof. Keanu provided the same evidence, consistent but weary of repeated challenges. At that point, a handful of onlookers raised their brows. They recognized him not just as a random figure from the sidewalk, but as a prominent Hollywood star. A few asked themselves what in the world the staff was doing. Why continue to harass him? But the Sterling Club had its own unwritten scripts, and they seldom yielded to sense or courtesy without a struggle. Moments later, the head bartender arrived and performed a similar dance of condescension. While handing him a drink with forced politeness, he did so with an icy undercurrent that spoke volumes. The staff believed Keanu was out of place. They saw the hoodie, albeit neatly worn, and the memory of him challenging the club's dress code. They had pegged him as a troublemaker. To make matters worse, a couple seated nearby took it upon themselves to lecture silently with disapproving glances. They epitomized old money arrogance, each expensive thread and piece of jewelry a subtle reminder that they belonged. They exchanged a snide comment about how the club's standards must be slipping, turning their discussion about Monaco and other upscale locales into a veiled reference that those who truly belonged never walked around in casual attire. Keanu, determined not to create a full confrontation, responded in measured tones. He asked for a table just as the reservation stated, but the labyrinth of excuses only deepened. Supposedly, every seat was filled. He was welcome to stand at the bar if he truly insisted, though even that was done with reluctance. As he waited, the tension swelled like an unstoppable tide. The staff's refusal to treat him with basic courtesy had become so blatant that even other patrons started to feel second-hand discomfort. Eventually, there was a moment of standoff between Keanu and the club's manager, who emerged in a crisp vest and the starched persona of someone used to controlling all circumstances with a polite yet unyielding grip. The manager claimed that the club was at full capacity, that the tables were reserved for respected members, that special wines or certain menu items were off-limits if you were not a familiar face. It was the same old tactic with new variations. In essence, the club was orchestrating a slow, methodical attempt to freeze him out, hoping he would simply give up and leave. But Keanu refused to abandon the reservation he had every right to. He remained calm, though beneath his composure, the tension was undeniable. The staff grew uneasy. They sensed that their typical strategy, nudging unwanted guests into resignation, might not succeed this time. To intensify the awkwardness, some of the wealthier patrons were enthralled by the unfolding spectacle. They watched as if the drama were staged for their personal entertainment, exchanging whispers about how entertaining it was to see someone challenge the club's unspoken social order. In the midst of this, a quiet yet definitive turning point occurred. Keanu pressed a button on his phone. No one heard him speak or saw him send a message, but soon enough, the manager received a notification. The abrupt panic in the manager's eyes spoke volumes. Some of the more observant individuals in the crowd, like the man in the navy suit who had been taunting Keanu from the start, noticed the manager tapping his phone in urgent confusion. Then the bartender's phone buzzed. Then the maitre d', standing at the entrance, felt his own device vibrate. Information was clearly traveling at lightning speed, though only Keanu and the staff knew exactly what it might be. The manager's composure cracked. He forced a strained smile, insisting there must have been a mistake. Now, the manager stammered out a claim that a table had just opened up. Not just any table, but one of the best seats in the house. A prime spot near the center of the restaurant, under the lavish chandelier, typically reserved for major icons or world leaders. Reluctantly, with the entire dining area watching, the manager led Keanu to this table, hoping to salvage the situation. A hush fell among the onlookers as they witnessed the abrupt turnaround. The brazen commentary from the navy-suited businessman and his cohorts died away, replaced by wide-eyed silence. How had the casual stranger they had dismissed seconds ago suddenly secured the restaurant's most coveted table? Keanu sat down, posture composed, eyes forward. No spark of triumph crossed his face. Rather than reveling in the staff's reversal, he looked more resigned than anything else, as though he had anticipated these outcomes from the start. A subdued murmur hummed through the onlooking patrons as they picked at their entrays. They recognized something irreversible had taken place. Yet the staff's attempts to deny him comfort persisted, albeit in more subtle ways. The manager hovered, trying to project courtesy but failing to mask the dread building behind his eyes. Service was slow to appear. A full 15 minutes crawled by without so much as a glass of water. Every other table around him had waiters gliding past with fresh drinks, sizzling steaks, decadent desserts, while Keanu was left conspicuously unattended. Eventually, a young waiter, looking torn between fear of the manager and sympathy for Keanu, approached. He asked for Keanu's order in a shaky voice. When Keanu requested a particular vintage, the same wine the patron in navy was enjoying, the waiter hesitated. He glanced toward the bar, saw the manager discreetly shake his head, and then apologized, explaining that this bottle was exclusively for the club's most established guests. In simpler terms, once again, the message was that Keanu didn't belong. Keanu, unwavering, requested a simpler house red. Even that was delivered with great reluctance. Soon, the same pattern repeated with food. Each time Keanu tried to order, the staff claimed the dish was no longer available or that they had run out. This transparent attempt to undermine his presence became almost theatrical. Meanwhile, the rest of the club's guests had begun whispering in earnest, some flabbergasted at the staff's blatant hostility. Others quietly took photos or recorded video. A few tapped out messages on social media, describing the bizarre standoff they were witnessing. Although Keanu never once raised his voice, the energy in the room crackled with tension. Every gesture of condescension was magnified under the eyes of all who watched. By now, it was widely apparent that a major star was being mistreated. Word spread with staggering speed, as smartphones glowed in discreet corners of the club, capturing real-time updates. Then the next wave of phone alerts descended. This time, it wasn't just staff who paled. Several guests discovered that the internet had erupted with coverage of the incident. People posted about seeing Keanu Reeves turned away at an exclusive members-only lounge. Comments flew about how he had complied with their rules, how they tried to blame a reservation mix-up, how they refused him even a glass of water until forced by embarrassment to offer him the best seat. The narrative was damning, and it reached thousands of eyes in minutes. A few minutes later, it exploded further. Articles sprang up on gossip sites, then on more reputable entertainment news outlets. The story was too juicy to ignore. A beloved Hollywood icon, known for his humble demeanor, disrespected by a pretentious club. Real-time videos of him changing his shoes on the sidewalk to satisfy the entrance policy circulated on social media. Even among the uninitiated, it was seen as a perfect encapsulation of elitism gone wrong. Inside the Sterling Club, the manager and the staff scrambled. They realized that their usual tactic, discounting or ignoring a perceived nobody, had backfired on a grand scale. The manager confronted the maitre d', demanding explanations that were impossible to give. Valets, waiters, bartenders, they all felt the suffocating pressure of an impending crisis. When Keanu finally stood up from that table, he never got to fully enjoy. Many in the dining room held their breath, wondering if the final confrontation would erupt. Yet Keanu merely set aside his napkin, rose quietly, and left behind enough money to cover any incidental costs. Even in these closing moments, he exhibited no anger, just a calm resolve to leave behind a place that had proven itself unworthy of his time. No one dared physically stop him. The manager hovered close, face pale, posture rigid with anxiety, as though on the verge of begging him to stay. Across the room, the man in the navy suit slowly rotated his wine glass, evidently recognizing the magnitude of their blunder. Several other patrons turned away, embarrassed they had watched it unfold without stepping in. Once outside, Keanu approached the valet stand. He waited calmly while the valet retrieved his mode of transportation, a vintage motorcycle sleek black with subtle silver trim, a perfect symbol of understated cool. The young valet returned, breathless and wide-eyed, stammering an apology he could barely articulate. Keanu listened, unaffected by the swirl of chaos inside the club. He thanked the valet and tipped generously, an act of quiet grace that spoke volumes. Within those few minutes, the avalanche of social media scorn was already roaring to life. Hashtags calling for a boycott of the Sterling Club trended. Comments ridiculing the staff's cruelty poured in from around the world. Everyone seemed to have an opinion: celebrities, fans, casual observers, each condemning the kind of elitism that would snub someone famous for simply dressing modestly. And so began an unprecedented wave of negative publicity aimed directly at the Sterling Club. Keanu Reeves, for his part, rode away into the Los Angeles night without making a statement. He did not demand the manager's job or call for revenge. He simply disappeared into the evening, leaving the wreckage behind. Word spread that he had been spotted later, quietly patronizing a small coffee shop, where he enjoyed a moment of solitude far from the Sterling Club's toxic environment. He neither gloated nor announced the club's transgressions. In an age where public feuds dominate headlines, his silence was the loudest commentary of all. Back inside the Sterling Club, panic took firm hold. Phones buzzed continuously, delivering dire messages from PR teams, outraged members, threatened sponsors, and major media outlets eager for a statement. The manager felt his control slip away by the second. Guests observed him with calculating eyes, already deciding whether they wished to stay affiliated with a venue that had just become infamous for all the wrong reasons. By the time the last patron left that night, the Sterling Club was unrecognizable from the smug bastion of privilege it had been mere hours before. The staff scurried like anxious animals, undone by their own arrogance. It wasn't just about losing face in front of a Hollywood legend. They faced the wrath of public opinion, something intangible yet powerful enough to shake even the sturdiest institution. Rumors whispered that key members were withdrawing their memberships, that major corporate events were being canceled, that prospective new patrons wanted no part of a place capable of such snobbery. In the next few days, apologies would be drafted, statements would be revised, and frantic internal meetings would occur, all attempting to repair the irreparable. Yet the memory of Keanu's calm departure lingered as a ghost, whispering that no matter what the club said, the world had already made up its mind. As for Keanu Reeves, he carried on as he always did, unburdened by the fiasco. His name was inevitably pulled into the spotlight, but he chose not to fan the flames with interviews or outraged commentary. That choice only fueled the public's admiration for him. People argued that this real-life event mirrored the characters he had portrayed: stoic, unassuming, and unexpectedly heroic in the face of casual cruelty. Thus ended the first half of this extraordinary saga. The Sterling Club's veneer of exclusivity had cracked under the weight of one quiet man's presence. It was never truly about the clothes he wore or the lines on the reservation list. It was about whether human decency could triumph over pompous tradition. On that night, decency had triumphed by refusing to fight on the club's terms. Yet the story was far from over. The seeds of consequences had only just been planted. Those consequences would ripple through the Sterling Club's foundation and spread beyond the city that had once regarded the venue as untouchable. In the wake of such a public misstep, the next steps would determine whether this enclave of power and wealth could remain standing. The entire world was watching to see how the Sterling Club would attempt to salvage its wrecked reputation, or whether it would collapse under the tsunami of bad press. Still, for all the chaos, the night belonged to Keanu Reeves. He had arrived at the Sterling Club as an unassuming figure in a black hoodie. By the end, he was the catalyst for an overdue reckoning about appearance, status, and the quiet illusions that supported them. When he disappeared into the LA night, he carried with him the subtle lesson that true worth is never measured by outward signs of prestige. Those inside the Sterling Club, everyone from the staff to the richest members, would find it impossible to forget. They were left to reckon with what they had done, how they had underestimated a man who sought nothing more than a reserved table for a single evening. In that realization, they understood an uncomfortable truth. Once the world saw the kind of gatekeeping and shallow bias lurking behind the Sterling facade, no amount of scrambled excuses could put the pieces back together again. A world away from the Sterling Club's gilded halls, Keanu Reeves stepped into the early morning light feeling an extraordinary stillness in the air. Yet beyond his calm demeanor, Los Angeles already buzzed with the aftermath of what had transpired just hours before. Media alerts, text messages, and social feeds were aflame with commentary about the exclusive club's self-inflicted downfall. He did not seek out those updates. He preferred quiet and reflection, two things that always kept him grounded. He made no statements, offered no further clarifications, and posted nothing on social media. His silence only fanned the public's fascination. While the news cycle spun stories of outrage, disbelief, and disdain toward the Sterling Club, Keanu turned his attention to the mundane tasks of everyday life. He visited a small neighborhood bakery whose owner greeted every customer with a smile. There, no one gave special treatment because of status or reputation. People stood in line with patient acceptance, as if the city's usual hustle had momentarily softened. Keanu observed the way strangers laughed over the simplest details, how fresh the bread smelled, how the light fell across the pastry display. He felt an undercurrent of hope amid normalcy, a reminder of what the night before had laid bare. The greatest kindnesses often emerge when no one is looking to impress. Behind the scenes, however, the Sterling Club and everyone associated with it grappled with the fallout. The manager faced an onslaught of calls from corporate sponsors, all of whom needed immediate explanations as to how such a debacle had occurred. Some of them threatened to pull funding if they didn't see swift changes. Others wanted to know if the staff involved would be dismissed or reprimanded. A chorus of outraged members joined the fray, demanding to know why their once pristine haven had become a spectacle overnight. The manager felt a growing sense of dread as he sifted through emails, each one more urgent than the last. Sponsors had started to sever ties. Cancellation requests poured in from individuals who had planned birthdays, anniversaries, or business functions at the club. The harshest blow came from a luxury brand that had essentially underwritten portions of the club's renovations. Their official letter stated, in careful legal wording, that they could not condone discrimination against any patron, especially one as universally respected as Keanu Reeves. They made clear that they saw no choice but to end any formal connection. The staff, from the maitre d' to the line cooks, felt the tension settle into the hallways like a permanent chill. No one quite knew what to say to each other. The events of the previous night had revealed a deep flaw in the club's culture, one that no single press statement could erase. The doorman who had first refused Keanu entry stood by his post with an uncharacteristic slump in his shoulders. He had thought himself an unassailable gatekeeper. Now, he suspected his days at the Sterling Club were numbered. Inside the manager's office, accusations flew behind closed doors. Staff members wondered if certain employees had leaked the story or captured the video that sparked the uproar. In truth, multiple guests had been filming, so no single culprit existed. Regardless, the instinct to find a scapegoat only fanned further discord. That tension spread to the kitchen, the bar, and every corner of the staff's domain. Meanwhile, Los Angeles teemed with speculation. Entertainment reporters hounded the outer perimeter of the Sterling Club, aiming their cameras at the ornate facade in hopes of capturing new developments. Some had heard rumors of an emergency board meeting that very morning. Anonymous tips claimed the meeting was convened to decide whether the entire leadership structure should be replaced. Others speculated that the Sterling Club might close its doors temporarily, at least until the furor subsided. Keanu, aware of the city's chatter but disinterested in fueling it, found himself in front of a modest movie memorabilia store on Melrose Avenue. It was the kind of place that sold vintage posters, collectibles, and rare VHS tapes from decades past. He loved losing himself in those aisles, browsing titles that reminded him of simpler times. No one approached him. The shop's owner, an elderly man with a passion for old cinema, recognized him yet never hovered. "You felt that, didn't you? That was no ordinary moment. If it hit you, hit like and let's keep going." Amid the quiet hum of the store's fluorescent lights, Keanu ran his fingertips across the spines of classic films, pausing to read cover art and reflect on the industry's evolution. He remembered how he had once been an up-and-coming actor, reliant on small roles and well-placed auditions. Back then, no one would have given him special treatment at a place like the Sterling Club. He would have expected a doorman's scrutiny if he couldn't prove he belonged. Still, the callousness he'd experienced the previous night represented a deeper, more institutionalized prejudice. He could not help recalling that the manager, the bartender, and the doorman had all seemed so sure of their own superiority. That certainty had collapsed when they realized who he was. Outside, morning had slid effortlessly into afternoon, and the frenzy of coverage about the Sterling Club only grew in volume. Major publications ran editorials questioning the nature of exclusive clubs in a city known for wealth disparity. The headline of one piece asked if these enclaves were relics of a bygone era. Another article pointed out that many Hollywood icons, including Keanu, often donated large sums to charitable causes that helped people who would never be admitted to such establishments. The public mood shifted toward questioning whether the city should continue to tolerate these gated islands of privilege. That afternoon, a swirl of new developments arrived like an unstoppable tide. Word leaked that the manager of the Sterling Club had personally tried to contact Keanu's representatives, offering to host an elaborate apology event. The club wanted him to return, presumably so they could shower him with free offerings and capture carefully orchestrated photographs of redemption. Rumors circulated that the invitation included complimentary membership for life, lavish dinners, and a promise of philanthropic tie-ins. However, the response from Keanu's camp, if any, remained unknown. In truth, Keanu paid little mind to the Sterling Club's attempts at damage control. He made no calls to his management team urging them to respond. In fact, he minimized any mention of the matter whenever his close friends or staff brought it up. Though he harbored a quiet disappointment, he was neither outraged nor vindictive. He saw that the entire event mirrored a pattern he had encountered in other aspects of life. People in positions of authority sometimes bullied those they deemed beneath them, only to scramble for forgiveness if they realized their mistake in front of a large audience. As the city inched toward evening, Keanu decided to visit a nonprofit organization he supported. The group offered art and music programs for underprivileged youths, believing that creative expression could transform vulnerable communities. Their facility, housed in a modest building near downtown, held bustling rooms full of bright paint, old instruments, and the laughter of children discovering new passions. Upon his arrival, staff members welcomed him warmly, grateful for his ongoing contributions. Here, no one cared about dress codes. Everyone wore splattered t-shirts and well-worn jeans as they worked with paintbrushes or hauled donated supplies. Keanu moved from room to room, quietly observing how each kid immersed themselves in art without fear of judgment. Some recognized him, but they only offered shy waves or broad grins. There were no lines of people clamoring for selfies or viral videos. It was a refuge from the chaos swirling outside. Yet even this sanctuary could not remain entirely untouched by the scandal enveloping the city. One volunteer privately mentioned that donors had been calling all day, referencing Keanu's name in connection to the fiasco at the Sterling Club. They wanted to stand in solidarity by increasing donations, ironically drawing attention to the link between the negativity of the club incident and the positivity of the youth-focused nonprofit. Keanu simply nodded, offering reassurance that the kids' well-being should remain the primary focus. He appreciated the outpouring, but did not want the children's art classes turned into a public relations statement. Night fell, and as darkness settled over Los Angeles, the bright neon signs on Sunset Boulevard glowed once again. Inside the Sterling Club, a sense of foreboding thickened the air. The once crowded dining room was only half filled. Some patrons had canceled reservations to avoid the gauntlet of reporters lurking outside. Tables that would ordinarily be booked weeks in advance remained conspicuously empty. The staff wandered with stiff postures, carrying trays of wine and appetizers, forced to watch this institution bleed out in real time. On the top floor, a group of board members convened around a large oval table. No lighthearted chatter accompanied their meeting. They were older men and women whose family names carried weight in the city's business sectors. In that windowless boardroom, they discussed whether the manager should step down and whether the entire staff at the entrance should be replaced. Some insisted that only drastic action could salvage their reputation, while others believed they could simply weather the storm and rely on the public's short memory. Everyone in the room recognized, though, that attacking Keanu Reeves publicly would be pointless. His reputation was far too pristine, his fanbase far too loyal. Rumors began circulating among a few staff members that the club might close for renovations earlier than planned, using it as an excuse to ride out the controversy behind locked doors. The Sterling Club's attorney worried that continuing public operations under intense media scrutiny was an invitation for future incidents. The manager, exhausted and fearful, reluctantly agreed that a temporary shutdown might be the least damaging option. Yet they could not agree on timing. Closing immediately would appear like an admission of guilt, but staying open risked further disastrous run-ins. Elsewhere in the city, Keanu took an evening stroll by a quiet stretch of the Los Angeles River. Long ago, this waterway was a vibrant natural asset, though now it was mostly a concrete channel flanked by narrow walking paths and graffiti-strewn walls. He sometimes walked there when he needed space to think. The slow current, reflecting the moonlight, calmed him. It reminded him that time moved forward, regardless of chaos or acclaim. Pedestrians passed by, some nodding politely in recognition, but no one intruded on his solitude. He reflected on how quickly a place like the Sterling Club could unravel when faced with public accountability. He wondered if the staff there recognized the harm they inflicted, not just on one patron, but on anyone who dared walk in without the right attire or social pedigree. That single confrontation had forced them to confront the possibility that dismissing others was no longer a private matter in a hyper-connected world. The next morning, a swell of media coverage jolted the city yet again. More articles and think pieces emerged, focusing less on the comedic or scandalous aspects of the incident and more on the broader questions of class barriers, entitlement, and social exclusion. Cable news channels ran segments dissecting the story. Late-night talk show hosts crafted monologues around the event, some comedic, others critical. A few pointed out how easily the entire fiasco might have been avoided had the Sterling Club staff simply shown courtesy. Keanu's name appeared repeatedly in coverage, though he said nothing. The sincerity of his silence gave weight to every mention. Reporters labeled him a symbol of humility and grace in an industry that often fed on self-importance. Social media posts praised him as a down-to-earth legend, turning the entire fiasco into a narrative about decency triumphing over pretense. The manager of the Sterling Club realized that each day without a direct response from Keanu worsened their public relations crisis. He lamented that if only Keanu would accept a personal apology in front of cameras, the scandal might shift. Some of the board members actually reached out to contacts in the film industry, pleading for any chance to broker an olive branch. But no direct meeting materialized, and any statement from Keanu's team merely reiterated that the actor had no interest in fueling controversy. Outside the club, the doorman who had blocked Keanu initially now showed up to work with a haunted look. His uniform remained crisp, but his sense of self-assurance had evaporated. No one openly blamed him alone, but whispers in the corridors suggested he was the face of the fiasco. His stance at the rope had set the tragedy in motion. He constantly felt eyes on him, as though he were an exhibit of caution. When new visitors arrived, he greeted them with extra courtesy, as if trying to balance an unseen ledger of goodwill. But attendance dwindled each day, leaving him with more time to brood on past mistakes. Across town, Keanu stayed busy with his own pursuits, never once glancing back at the Sterling Club's meltdown except when unavoidable headlines intruded on his day. He stopped at a grassroots automotive shop that specialized in refurbishing old motorcycles for charity auctions. He found the mechanics there to be kindred spirits, hardworking, curious about the interplay of parts and systems, unpretentious in their approach to life. They welcomed him with easy smiles, offering him a chance to observe some of their custom projects. He recalled how the staff at the Sterling Club had looked upon his casual shoes with derision. He marveled at the contrast in this garage, where oil-stained boots and practical denim were signs of skill and dedication. An old battered radio played classic rock as sparks flew from metal being welded. The energy felt more alive than the hushed, staged luxury of that members-only lounge. During a break, one of the volunteers at the shop mentioned seeing a fundraiser on social media, where fans proposed donating to charity in Keanu's name each time another negative article emerged about the Sterling Club. It amused Keanu, though he kept a straight face. He simply nodded at how the public could transform one unfortunate event into a vehicle for something good. At the same time, swirling rumors hinted that law firms were sniffing around the Sterling Club, seeking clients with potential discrimination cases. A few attorneys saw an opening to file a high-profile lawsuit, leveraging the media attention. Bloggers and freelance journalists dug through old reviews and online forums. They uncovered scattered anecdotes from other patrons who claimed the club had quietly refused them service for spurious reasons, a hairstyle that didn't fit, an accent that offended some staff members' sensibilities, a missing referral from an existing member. None of those anecdotes had ever garnered much attention, But in the wake of the Keanu incident, they formed a compelling pattern. As evidence accumulated, a civil rights organization began publicly questioning whether the Sterling Club violated anti-discrimination statutes. It was no longer just about one night of rudeness. The entire enterprise stood accused of systematically turning people away based on superficial judgments. Sponsors who had not already pulled support scrambled to disassociate themselves before the narrative swallowed them too. Late one evening, while Los Angeles pulsed with activity, Keanu entered a small lounge tucked inside a historic downtown hotel. This particular lounge had once been a speakeasy during Prohibition, and a sense of hidden magic still clung to its antique fixtures. Keanu settled into a corner seat. The staff, as always, recognized him but never hovered. They offered a warm greeting, then let him be. He soaked in the discreet atmosphere, reflecting on the unpredictable nature of fame. He found it paradoxical that some of the very establishments that prided themselves on exclusivity sought him out. They wanted his image, his presence, to elevate their status. Yet they revealed their true mindset the instant they believed they could judge him by appearance alone. If that was how they treated a known figure, he wondered how they treated every nameless individual who walked in without the right connections or attire. Meanwhile, the Sterling Club found itself on the receiving end of pointed questions from local politicians. A city council member publicly criticized its membership policies, calling for an investigation into whether the club had broken any public accommodation laws. The manager received a letter insisting that he produce records of how many people had been refused entry over the years and on what grounds. That command sent shockwaves through the board. They had operated with an aura of untouchability for decades, but now they were being asked for tangible evidence of their practices. Whispers circulated among the staff that the manager began frantically compiling data, hopping to spin the numbers in a way that didn't look incriminating. A few staff members, uncertain of their own roles, started distancing themselves. Some quietly resigned, not wanting to be complicit if a formal investigation found deeper wrongdoing. The once unified Sterling Club, which had functioned like a micro-kingdom, was unraveling, thread by thread. Amid this storm, Keanu found unexpected peace by returning to the places in Los Angeles that resonated with his childhood love for the arts. He visited an old community theater where he had once rehearsed lines for small productions. In the dimly lit backstage area, he glimpsed dusty costumes from Shakespearean plays and smiling cast photos from a time when no one was famous, and everyone simply shared a passion for storytelling. He recalled how every actor in those local productions had been welcomed, regardless of background or personal style. It was a stark contrast to the Sterling Club's gatekeeping. He imagined a young hopeful striding up to that velvet rope, full of dreams yet lacking the polished veneer the staff expected. How many times had such a person turned away, feeling unworthy, never returning to try again? The media firestorm refused to abate. A high-profile gossip channel obtained and released internal emails from the Sterling Club's PR team. Those messages revealed a frantic scramble to appease the board by blaming the fiasco on a few rogue employees. Yet the communications also confirmed that the manager himself had upheld harsh entrance criteria for years, with explicit instructions on who to encourage and who to deter. The revelations ignited fresh outrage. Commenters on social media blasted the club for trying to find scapegoats instead of acknowledging systemic problems. Still, Keanu stayed silent. Friends reached out, offering to help him leverage the moment for some public good, or at least to clarify his perspective. He politely turned them down. If the fiasco led to more people rethinking their attitudes, that would be enough. He believed that a moral victory meant more when it didn't chase the spotlight. That belief unsettled the Sterling Club's leadership more than anything else. They couldn't pivot the narrative when the person at the center of it refused to speak publicly. If Keanu had berated them or demanded compensation, they might have countered with an apology and staged amends. Instead, he had simply walked away, leaving them to confront their own reflection in the eyes of the public. Days stretched into a week. The manager fought tooth and nail to keep the Sterling Club afloat. Financial losses mounted. Attorneys requested meeting after meeting, culminating in legal fees that eclipsed any membership dues trickling in. Sponsorship deals that once seemed ironclad evaporated almost overnight. High-profile members distanced themselves, stating that they needed to protect their own reputations. Keanu, on the other hand, felt more at peace than he had in a long time. He continued his quiet routines, visiting local cafes, reading scripts for potential new film projects, and supporting charitable events that rarely made the headlines. The stark contrast between this simplicity and the Sterling Club's cataclysmic unraveling did not escape him. He often reflected that an institution built on superficial values might always have been fragile, like a glass tower waiting for a single crack to shatter it. In the stillness of another warm afternoon, he returned to the children's nonprofit. He found the kids clustered around a mural they were painting, depicting cityscapes blending into nature scenes. Their excited chatter reminded him that art had the power to transcend boundaries. No one there questioned who was worthy of picking up a paintbrush. No one imposed a dress code or demanded references. His gaze landed on a quote someone had scrawled along the top edge of the mural. It spoke about empathy, how true change occurs when people view others not as outsiders, but as fellow souls worthy of respect. He thought of how that singular principle, if practiced by the Sterling Club staff, could have prevented so much turmoil. In that moment, he felt more certain than ever that he had been right to walk away without trying to force an apology from them. Real contrition had to arise internally. It could not be negotiated under threat of bad publicity. Yet events were still unfolding. Within the next few days, speculation grew that the Sterling Club's attorney had advised a temporary shutdown. Rumors swirled that the board was close to confirming a date when the premises would close for renovations, giving them time to regroup and rebrand. Anonymous staff members leaked that the manager planned to resign under pressure, which might allow the club to claim new leadership and a renewed commitment to fairness. Some insiders whispered that the place would never reopen, that the damage was irreversible. Through it all, Keanu's name remained a fixture in every article and broadcast touching on the scandal. His silence became an enduring symbol, one that invited countless interpretations. To some, he was a martyr of class elitism. To others, he was a quiet crusader exposing the hollow core of such institutions. Still others believed he was simply letting the club self-destruct, content to move on without vengeance. In the background, staff at the Sterling Club whispered about new developments. Lawsuits were rumored to be on the horizon. Investigative journalists asked pointed questions about hidden membership policies. One local news station unearthed testimonies from former employees who recounted discriminatory instructions handed down by management. These revelations stripped away any last remnants of the club's defense that the Keanu Reeves incident was an isolated case. And yet, for all the drama swirling at the Sterling Club, Keanu's daily life continued at its normal pace. He supported film industry colleagues with cameo appearances, visited quiet galleries to appreciate emerging artists' work, and granted occasional interviews about his upcoming projects, never once uttering a direct statement about the fiasco. He recognized that focusing on personal negativity would only overshadow the pursuits that genuinely mattered to him, like championing kindness and creativity in real, tangible ways. As the second week rolled around, momentum accelerated toward a tipping point. Media attention began hinting that the Sterling Club's final reckoning was imminent. Some columns suggested that the ongoing investigations might uncover an entire system of bias. Legal experts shared that, if proven, such findings could lead to permanent closure or at least a city-enforced revocation of certain operational permits. The tension built like a drumbeat. Still, no final outcome had arrived. People who followed the saga wondered if the club's management would attempt a last-ditch gesture to rectify their reputation. Others speculated that Keanu Reeves might speak at the 11th hour, either condemning or forgiving the establishment. He did neither. At a small philanthropic gathering for foster youth, someone asked Keanu if he believed that public pressure truly changed people's hearts. Though he gave no direct answer, his expression betrayed a glimmer of sorrow at how superficial many apologies could be. He imagined the manager, the board members, and the doorman scrambling to protect their carefully curated world. They were likely drafting statements, making tearful admissions behind closed doors, and rationalizing their behavior. He suspected some might genuinely repent, while others simply saw repentance as a means to salvage their brand. Night once again settled over the city of Los Angeles, and an uneasy hush fell upon the Sterling Club. The building still stood, lit from within by ornate chandeliers and peppered with staff who braced for another day of diminishing returns. Each passing hour chipped away at the illusions of grandeur. The once crowded bar area was deserted. The sumptuous lounge echoed with the faint sound of a lone piano. A few older members ventured in, sipping drinks as though in mourning for a beloved but now ruined institution. In those final days of rumor, speculation, and slow collapse, the city awaited an ending, some dramatic flourish that would tie together all the threads of scandal and retribution. Yet nothing definitive arrived. The story felt suspended, as if waiting for one last revelation or turn of the wheel. Keanu, for his part, stood apart from all this, continuing his pattern of quiet living. He visited a community farm to help distribute fresh produce to low-income families. He spent hours outdoors under the sun, arranging boxes of vegetables and guiding parents to the right areas. Volunteers recognized him but treated him as a fellow helper. The exhaustion felt genuine, the gratitude from families unforced and deeply human. He listened to children talk about how excited they were to taste a vegetable they had never tried before. He saw elderly visitors form small lines to receive groceries without fear of being turned away. No one at the farm pretended to hold power over anyone else. As the sky turned orange with dusk, he leaned against a wooden railing and recalled how different the atmosphere at the Sterling Club had been: formal, pretentious, and exclusionary. He thought about how unthinkable it would be for that staff to hand out anything for free, expecting nothing in return. That difference revealed the heart of the fiasco. The club had built an empire on the idea that only certain people mattered. They had shown no remorse until the day their victim turned out to be someone with enough fame to shine a harsh spotlight on their conduct. Still, the end of this story had not arrived. The last chapter hovered on the horizon, preparing to reveal whether the Sterling Club would face irreversible closure, pivot toward an insincere rebranding, or attempt a final performance of contrition. The city watched, enthralled. The media fueled anticipation, searching for scraps of insider gossip. Every day brought new statements and half-apologies from the club, but the public did not seem to accept their words. Keanu Reeves, though central to the storm, simply continued to live, forging his path without rancor or self-righteousness. He had long ago learned that one's character was shaped by how one treated others when there was nothing to gain. Now, he had reminded an entire city of that lesson. The question that remained was whether those who had placed their faith in exclusivity would absorb that wisdom or vanish trying. For now, the story was far from settled. The city, the media, and the Sterling Club all seemed to hold their breath, awaiting the moment where everything might snap. More revelations threatened to surface, more voices clamored to be heard, and more factions weighed in on the moral and social ramifications of one night's refusal. Only time would reveal the final outcome, and whether a once prestigious fortress could be salvaged, redeemed, or merely left behind as another monument to arrogance. While those possibilities hovered, Keanu Reeves lived on in the quiet, transformative spaces, helping with charitable projects, appreciating small joys, and embodying the very humility that had made so many people question the Sterling Club's rigid sense of worth. Far from the swirling chaos, he stood as the unspoken reminder that status and kindness need not be at odds, and that sincerity will always outlast any fortress built on the pretense of exclusivity. In the days that followed, the Sterling Club's fate was sealed by a press release that circulated among local media outlets and on the club's own website, citing the need for a full reorganization and cultural realignment. The statement announced the club would close its doors indefinitely. Whispers of forced closure and legal disputes had dogged the institution for weeks, but the board worded everything to sound graceful, in hopes of salvaging what little remained of their reputation. Keanu Reeves observed the final unraveling from a distance. He never issued a comment, nor did he offer any public endorsement or condemnation. He simply carried on with his quiet routines. On the morning that the closure became official, he found himself at a small neighborhood cafe he often frequented, just a humble spot with old wooden tables and a chalkboard menu. While sipping coffee, he saw the news flash across a local paper someone had left behind. One bold headline read that the Sterling Club would be shuttered for renovations, but insiders expected it never to reopen in its previous form. He felt neither triumph nor sadness. To him, the club's fall was inevitable once its entrenched biases came to light. His thoughts drifted to the people he'd met outside its doors, the young valet, the doorman, the uncertain staff who had struggled between following orders and exercising kindness. He wondered if any of them would find better paths, freed from the unspoken code that had defined exclusivity for so long. That evening, after a calm drive through downtown, he arrived at the children's nonprofit he often supported. Word of the Sterling Club's closure had spread here, too. Staff members mentioned how donors had brought it up, some brimming with relief that a place embodying such prejudice could no longer hide behind velvet ropes. The children in the art room, oblivious to the intricacies of class conflict, continued painting their murals. Keanu helped them wash brushes and refill paint, all the while reflecting on how acceptance and warmth could blossom in even the most modest settings. Outside, the sun dipped below the skyline in vivid shades of orange and pink. Keanu Reeves took a moment by himself, gazing toward the horizon. The chaos sparked by one night's refusal felt distant now, replaced by an awareness that genuine compassion outweighed any prestige. In the end, no formal apology from the Sterling Club had been needed, because the real reckoning had arrived all on its own. He walked to his motorcycle and paused before turning the key. Flashes of memory crossed his mind. The club's ornate doors, the guarded entrance, the staff's misguided certainty that a man in a hoodie did not belong. A small sense of peace settled in him. Everything had ended as it should have. Without dramatics or revenge, the truth about who truly belonged was made plain. When he sped off into the Los Angeles night, he felt nothing but the cool wind and the open road. Kindness, quiet humility, and genuine respect had triumphed in the simplest way, by letting arrogance destroy itself. And Keanu Reeves, unchanged and unburdened, rode on, content to carry that lesson with him wherever he went next. If you enjoyed this story, there's another video on screen right now. Go ahead and give it a look for an even more astonishing tale. And don't forget, we'll have many more uplifting and dramatic stories coming your way. So make sure you subscribe to our channel, that way you'll never miss our newest uploads.